I truly think that one day we must unite the factions, because I think one day we shall have an external enemy. And by external enemy, I mean
very external.
NHI. Think of the Earth. We are a very yummy apple. I think remote action is possible. Can you imagine stopping at heart just by thinking about it? Say from Qatar. That's some scary shit.
You have spoken publicly with these MH370 videos, and it seemed like the civilian aircraft just disappeared in the Southeast Asian territory.
The most complex of problems has the simplest of solution depending on perspective. When I saw that thing open up, I saw the Pais effect in action. This is the Pais effect. Oh my God. So we're talking about artificial singularity.
So excited to be here. This has been a long time coming because I've consumed a lot of your content. Before we get into our guest today, I want to present our co-host, the esteemed pseudonymously named Jack. He has to go under a pseudonym. He works in some sensitive areas, but he is very familiar with some of these heterodox scientific frameworks. And so I'll my interview with Hal Puthoff and Eric Weinstein. Sometimes I get out of my depths scientifically, and I definitely am with Sal Pais. And so I'm very excited to have Jack here. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thrilled to be here. Thank you.
What are you wearing, first off?
Thought I'd give a little props to a very successful organization, eponymously known as Skunkworks. So thank you for your service.
There you go. And we have an amazing Navy scientist who has sent shockwaves in kind of UFO world. It's interesting. In 2017, you had, revelations around the existence of UFO study groups and stuff, ATIP, OSAP, that sort of thing. But you also had these patents that were filed by a guy who was right here named Sal Pais, which touch on some very interesting subjects. One might even say that they seem to dovetail with how you might build a UFO. And we have a hat right here, which he's offered me at the beginning of the show, which is very nice. It's an F-35 hat. So thank you, Sal. Thank you for being here.
You're very welcome, my friend. You're very welcome. And never remember, as far as Hal Puthoff, as far as Eric Weinstein and Jack here, trust me, you are at that level. You're able to trust me on this. I've seen many podcasts, and you're one of the best. So absolutely.
Well, we can
kudos to you, brother.
Agree to disagree, but I'm happy to be the last mile of kind of cogent distribution on deeper people like yourself. So, do you have any kind of disclaimers at the top, because you are in very sensitive areas as well, and I want to make sure we don't hit any tripwires.
Let me CYA right off the bat with the. Yes, my name is Salvatore Pais. I work for the United States Navy. I used to work for the United States Space Force. Let me say at this time that I come on this podcast as a private citizen, and my opinion, my statements, everything I say, everything I have said is my own. The Navy and the Space Force are not responsible for any of these statements whatsoever. And also, I would like to say that I'm not on this program, on this podcast, to E-cubed. In other words, to enlighten and educate the enemy. So certain things that I think, certain subject matter that we may touch upon, if it deals with certain frequency, Jack, you know this well, we keep numbers out of play, and certain things that if you, for example, see me slip, please orient me and guide me accordingly.
Yeah.
Before we dive into today's amazing episode of American Alchemy, I want to thank Aura for being the amazing sponsor of this show. Have you ever Googled yourself or maybe a friend and been totally freaked out by how much personal info popped up? I did it once and saw old addresses, phone numbers, stuff I didn't even realize was out there. Honestly, it made me wonder who else could see all of that. In 2024, there were multiple high-level data breaches, including a breach of the National Public Database. The incident compromised over 2.9 billion records used for background checks, including critical personal information such as full names, addresses, dates of birth, phone numbers, and most importantly, social security numbers. Their data broker opt-out tool goes after those shady sites that scrape and sell your info, so you're less of a sitting duck for scammers. Plus, Aura provides identity theft protection, monitoring billions of data points, everything from your social security number to your bank info, and lets you know fast if something suspicious shows up. If the worst happens, each adult on your plan gets $1 million in identity theft insurance, up to $5 million total if you have 5 adults. Aura also has other great features like a VPN and antivirus that all come bundled in an easy-to-use app. I'm not leaving my data out there for anyone to grab, and you shouldn't either. The best part is I get all of this in one app at an affordable price. I'm not leaving myself and my family vulnerable to data breaches and brokers. And if you don't want to either, you can go to aura.com/Jesse Michels, Michels with no A, to try 2 weeks for free. That should be enough time for Aura to find out if any of your personal data is exposed and for you to realize that Aura is a no-brainer.
As Dave Grush said, we're not here to help the adversary do their job.
Absolutely. Mr. Grush is 100% correct.
But simultaneous to that, it's actually a national security risk. And you have extremely intelligent STEM students growing up in the wrong frameworks and not being privy to any of this stuff and thinking it's all quackery. That seems like actually a matter of national security risk.
Yes.
It's an absolutely broken paradigm. You're right. And it's something that has wheedled its way inside the R&D framework of our national defense infrastructure. And it's kneecapped us from making critical advances that have national security implications.
Absolutely.
I want to start with kind of autobiographical, because it's interesting. You go on all these podcasts and we talk about the science, and I want to get into the science, and I think Jack can help kind of drive some of the conversation later. But who are you? Where are you from? How'd you get into this stuff?
Oh, wow. Origins?
Yeah.
All right. My name is Salvatore Pais. That's the way you pronounce it in Romanian. I was born in Romania, in Bucharest, Romania, as a matter of fact, capital of Romania. I came here when I was about 13 and a half of age. Queens, New York City, Queens boy, as they say. Still say coffee and other things as well. Love a New York Reuben. Oh my God, from the Brooklyn Deli, a real Reuben, not anyway, I'm gonna keep it nice since this is a family show of sorts. All right.
I think
Every now and then I'll let it slip. The people that know me know that almost every other word the real Salvatore will use is the F word. So every now, like you would not believe, I can weave a tapestry of obscenity second to none. I took that from a Christmas story, but hey, every now and then you don't have to be an original. So, yeah. So, again, I was born in Romania. I came here as a young kid. I grew up in the public education system. I went to Brooklyn. In Brooklyn, to one of the well-known high schools there was Brooklyn Technical High School, not as on the same level as Bronx High School of Science or Stuyvesant in Manhattan, but from a technical point of view, is very well known and very well liked. And then I went to Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. No, it's not a military school. It's actually very highly accredited. It usually makes the U.S. News top 50 universities almost every year. And I love my CWI. I would never exchange it, for example, going to MIT or any other school. It's just, I was brought up there and I stayed there. I did my graduate studies there. Then I was extremely fortunate to have, how should I say, a job at Northrop Grumman. Well, before then, I had a couple of stints in New York, Electronic Systems Associates, Cisco and Hennessy. But I was extremely fortunate to work for Northrop Grumman Corporation and Advanced Systems, Advanced Concepts, and among other things. And then I transitioned to the USPTO. At the time it was Alexandria, Virginia. They had moved from Crystal City, and then I was fortunate enough to come here, Navarre, and then certain things occurred, and I was fortunate to work for strategic systems programs at the Washington Navy Yard. And then I went for the Space Force and then came back.
And so in 2017, you're probably most known for these patents.
Yeah.
The title of the patent just says a lot. A hybrid craft using an inertial mass modification device. How does one even get into a topic like that?
I was very interested. I've seen certain things as far as what has been shown on certain documentaries. And then...
Any documentaries or things you can mention?
It was a lot of things that were done by Dr. Stephen Greer.
Okay.
And a great deal of things. As a matter of fact, I hold the man in very high esteem. I feel it's very unfortunate that the UFO field seems to be so divided. It's almost as divided as the country is at this point in time. And I wish people were more unified. I've always been a person that drives toward unification of concepts, ideas. You can always work things out. You can always reach a compromise, always. And I think everybody benefits as a result. The alternative is the enemy wins. When we fight amongst each other, our strength is divided, is weakened. The enemy will always take strength from that.
So you're watching like Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind or Unacknowledged, things like that.
Absolutely.
How do these crafts
operate? How do they work?
How do they work?
And then they work.
So this patent is somewhat you kind of reverse engineering and how, you think they work based on the observables and these sorts of
exactly. The whole idea is it can't all be Newtonian propulsion. You basically take something, you throw it out the back, and the thing moves forwards. The whole idea of the Newtonian third law of action-reaction can't all be Newtonian. What if there's non-Newtonian propulsion? So in other words, can we do something to the field that we operate in, the gravitational field, for example, to make objects have diminished inertia?
Yeah.
Since inertial mass and gravitational mass, after all, there is equivalence between them.
Right. So I have a dumb question. You publish a thing like this, and it seems like pretty well synthesized and researched. Why doesn't, presumably there are legacy programs, if you believe David Grush reverse engineering this stuff, why don't they immediately kind of hit you up?
No idea whatsoever. As a matter of fact, at one point in time, I almost expected to be contacted, so then the idea almost occurred to me, almost instantaneously, that they must have this somewhere.
They've already sorted it.
That they have figured it out, and they already operating certain devices. And then I hear these things about the reverse engineering craft, and then that thing bothers me, because everything I've done is really based on Oliver Heaviside's version of Maxwell's equation.
Yep.
The four unknowns that electrical engineers have grown up to love and use, thank God, because the original were absolute extremely
and unusual, unusable, mess.
Quaternion, formalism. My goodness, So again, the genius of Oliver Heaviside, and all you do, couple it with the harmonic oscillator, and certain things occur based again on resonance. Resonance is extremely important because it talks to energy amplification.
So you're implying that you don't believe in the sort of ET craft hypothesis. You think this is all sort of man-made?
Or do you think you've just stumbled across the same physics of operation?
Yeah.
I believe that there's man-made tech and there's ET tech. It's possible the ET tech was reverse engineered from gifts or craft that were found, historical items, who knows where and how. And there's another avenue. There's man-made tech. Why can we have that kind of acumen, that kind of mind? You mean only these, they call non-human
intelligence.
Only NHIs can have this kind of intellect? Why can we? I mean, we should take pride in who we are as Homo sapiens sapien. We represent a certain intellect.
And this is an interesting question. Are there multiple branches, multiple tech trees that could be filtering their way through the defense intelligence base? Some of them approachably nuts and bolts-ish from a technology that's a couple of hundred years more advanced than us, and then other examples that are far more exotic, that when you open them up, you see nothing familiar, you see nothing recognizable.
Absolutely. So in other words, there's man-made tech and ET tech, and I think you can tell them apart. The one thing that struck me based on what I came to understand from the idea of the superforce, if you take the gravitational field equations of Einstein, you can readily deduce that the superforce acting on the spatial temporal geometric structure, what we understand as a quantum vacuum, locally, can actually give birth, generate energy density.
Right. This is the idea of Robert Wheeler, the notion that energy density determines the shape of space-time or the shape of the quantum vacuum, and the quantum vacuum determines the propagation of that energy
and
density.
The superforce equation, which is really a re-rendering of the Einstein gravitational field equations,
right,
talks to this.
Right.
Talks to the, and then Bob Lazar mentioned at one point that it seemed to him that the so-called sports model was as if grown out of the vacuum itself. Absolutely smooth, like a 3D printing out of the space-time fabric itself. The superforce speaks to that directly.
Are you familiar with Ken Shoulders' work?
Of exactly vacuum objects, I've read certain papers as well.
It's very interesting, this idea of the vehicle being 3D printed out of the quantum vacuum, because we can't seem to quite understand exactly, because, when you talk about chemical vapor deposition, the manufacturing techniques associated with making very small nanostructured heterolattices. My graduate work, for instance, is in topological material physics. And so we do know more than is generally acknowledged about how to manufacture those lattices, but we don't have a lot of control over where exactly the atoms go. We just spit them out, and physics takes over and it deposits them where it wants to deposit them in the lattice. So if you need them to be in extremely specific lattice points, and then you need to do layer after layer after layer to get these really novel behaviors, topological superconducting layers, topological insulative layers, Josephson junctions, and then one after the other. We don't know how to do that. So does that get 3D printed somehow?
Fascinating. Okay. Well, we're getting deep quick. I want to just for the mass audience kind of lay some scaffolding, lay the groundwork. So you mentioned Heaviside. Most people now, when it comes to kind of classical electrodynamics, go off of Oliver Heaviside's kind of simplification of Maxwell's equation.
Absolutely.
So where is conventional classical electrodynamics off, where you think you've found kind of a different branch of Heaviside? Because most people adhere to him, right?
This is not anything new. This is not new physics. This is a new perspective on all physics. All I've done was taking the Heaviside version of Maxwell's equation, coupled them with a harmonic oscillator, and shown that you get nonlinearity with respect to the angular frequency, either vibration and or spin, because as you well know, the mathematics is heavily similar.
Right.
And come up with, on the second conditions, you get resonance conditions.
So you get these
energy amplification.
emergent phenomena that are not immediately obvious
phenomena
under normal circumstances.
So let's break it down. Okay. What is a harmonic oscillator?
A harmonic oscillator, if you think of the best way to describe it is from Hooke's law, the whole idea of F equal minus K X.
A spring.
Exactly.
A spring oscillator.
Exactly.
That makes a sinusoid in XY.
Yes, sir. And then you just write, as you well know from Newton's second law, an acceleration, or m, the x double prime dt square. The whole idea of ma equal this minus kx. From that results your harmonic oscillator.
So we're talking about derivatives from differential calculus, and this is how you go from y equals kx, Hooke's law.
Extremely simple stuff.
For you, combining that concept with Heaviside.
From there, what happens is from a simple scalar, as a matter of fact, I send you what we presented to the patent examiner, and you can have that with a podcast. You can actually, sure, absolutely. That's been already presented. It's in the public domain, so it's considered non-governmental, unclassified.
Domain.
That's it. It's public domain. Since the USPTO primary examiner, a gentleman by the name of Philip Bonzel, has already has put it into the public domain. It was given to him via phone conversation. So that particular PDF was sent to him, and then we had a phone conversation with the Navier attorney, Mr. Mark Glut, which, by the way, was tremendous in every one of the 5 patent applications, mind you. 3 of them became patents. The 2 that did not become patents are the ones that seem to be most mundane. The high-frequency gravitational wave generator became a patent. The high-energy electromagnetic field generator became a patent.
The most exotic concepts. Yeah.
Using an inertial mass reduction device became a patent. After some doing, of course, Mr. Philip Bonzel was extremely in awe of that. He said, this is not possible. I mean, neutron stars cannot produce these electric fields and magnetic fields. We're talking about electric fields on the order of 10 to the 18 volts per meter.
So yeah, how do we get to that? If you're combining the harmonic oscillator with the Heaviside stuff, how do you get to those, those that big of electric field size?
Again, it is in that PDF, and you can follow the math. It's extremely simple. But the whole idea is that you get, from the scaling analysis, you get a simple relationship that shows that it must be correct, because the electric field, that relationship, it gives you a relation. So the scaling analysis of the Heaviside version of Maxwell's equation give you a simple relationship for the electric field strength, E, and also one for the magnetic induction, otherwise known as the magnetic flux density, also known as the B field. Well, from those 2 relationships, you can actually see that E max divided by B max equals C, equals the speed of light, exactly what Maxwell showed. The whole idea.
Yeah.
So that must be correct. And when you couple the harmonic oscillator within those 2 relationships, you get something for the B field, which is amazing. It shows variance with respect to angular frequency squared. So in other words,
that's interesting. So now I'm tracking, because in your patent you use microwaves inside the annular channel, and it's like you call it to vibrate the atoms.
Right.
You called it a confined photoelectric effect.
That's
and
exactly
what I
what
found
it is.
interesting is the high temperature superconductor patent is necessary for the high frequency gravity wave patent.
They speak
to
each other,
because there's a high Q factor associated with the high temperature superconductor.
But for some reason, the patent examiner did not even take that into consideration.
Sure.
Exactly what you said, because then just by that simple argument, from an enablement point of view, he should have passed, or they should have passed the room temperature superconductor.
So what allows that frequency
Dr. Victor Lachno, Russian, of the Russian Academy of Sciences, actually shows in his archive published paper. I've never been able to publish an archive, so the man must have, either known some moderators. Again, he showed that my room temperature superconductor from a mechanism point of view could work. And yet the patent examiner just refused to grant the patent. So
it was an incredible idea, because you describe what is a proximity superconductor, probably also a topological superconductor.
From someone that actually has that knowledge. Thank you, Jack.
Yeah. So encased in a ceramic. And so it's the interfacial layer that is superconducting. That's where the current moves. And so when you've got these 100 terahertz microwaves inside the annular channel of your triangle patent, it's it's exciting, and you're setting up that standing wave, and that's
what it's all about. Resonance,
the W
energy
squared term is
amplification.
why this blows up. Yeah,
That omega square is very important.
yeah.
And for some reason, people refuse to see the mathematics speaks to the physics.
Are you worried at all about that huge B field and the surviving materials surviving it? Because
That's something we have to be aware of.
the ninth Tesla fields,
as you well know, you have to be extremely careful, because usually when you go above 10 to the second, maybe even pushing 10 to the third Tesla, we're talking about tremendous
well, we've never even
yields on the
B field's a
materials.
magnetic field measured in Tesla. We've never made a magnetic field any larger than 30 Tesla, 40 Tesla.
Usually
in CERN and gigantic electromagnets.
I heard of something up to 120 Tesla, but that's a rumor.
Yeah, and the Earth's magnetic field's like a thousandth of a Tesla, or 10,000
So how
of a Tesla.
would you insulate materials from that size of magnetic field?
You
Simple.
wouldn't insulate it. You'd use something that this would all want to be synergistic. So you would want to use something that benefits in some way from exposure to that field, rather than trying to fight physics. I think that's where really brilliant engineering comes in, is that you're not going to put a bunch of things together that are parasitically affecting each other in negative ways, and you're trying to finagle your design space to make it work. You'd put a bunch of things together that actually help each other work better with their side effects.
Physics is not enough. The engineering of the physics trumps everything else.
Yeah.
Again, experiment trumps theory every time. And I believe trumps should become a verb.
Have you worked on this from an engineering perspective at all, or is it purely theoretical?
We worked on a high energy electromagnetic field generated experiment at Navier. However, we weren't able to obtain a charge, an electrical charge of more than 10 to the minus 8 coulombs. We need at least one coulomb
on the skin
to show that the Pais effect is correct. I call it the Pais effect not out of hubris, as people would choose to call it, but because it was something purely original. And I decided, why not? Let's call it something that's never been called before. And there was one other Pais there, Abraham Pais, the autobiographer of Einstein himself, a great physicist of his own right, said, okay, let's couple the names.
In the context of all we've talked about, would you step through your explanation of the Pais effect from a high level?
Absolutely. Okay. Usually I define it as controlled motion of electrically charged objects, usually from solids to plasma, based on accelerated vibration and or accelerated spin, giving rise to extremely high energy densities. Hence, electromagnetic energy fluxes. However, it can also be thought of as the generation of high energy densities based on certain vibratory fields of plasmas, cold plasmas. We're talking about plasmas that have been driven far from equilibrium.
Your xenon gas in the annulus that you kind of move it back and forth with your 100 terahertz alternating electric field.
The terahertz frequency is an interesting field that should be looked into. But again, we're not here to educate and enlighten the enemy, so that's as far as I go.
Well, it is interesting, how Puthoff has talked about these kind of micron layers, magnesium bismuth, and he says that they, micro-size waveguides for terahertz. And so
there's a reason. Look into the slide presentation that I presented at the 2019 AIAA SciTech. That presentation, please also post that in your podcast along with the patent examiner interview, those slides. It makes a lot of sense, but look very carefully, slides 4 to slides 9 in that particular presentation, and you'll see why the terahertz frequency is so important. It speaks something to that Dr. Eric W. Davis published in one of those DIA reports that I saw.
Teleportation.
More to do with a certain macro dimension.
A fifth dimension?
A fifth dimension.
Right. So there's I don't know how much you want to say, but there's a coupling factor between the electric field that you're setting up to generate high frequency gravity waves and this oscillatory behavior of the particles, which potentially polarizes the quantum vacuum and allows you, the analogy that I have used is, imagine you have a Ziploc bag that's full of water, but it's kind of sloppy. And you imagine you can push on it on one side and you set up a pressure gradient. So now you have the quantum vacuum doing work for you and pushing on you with its own pressure. And it has such a tremendous energy density, like 10 to the 44th, calories per cubic centimeter, or something bananas, that it does an incredible amount of work.
So it's literally is space-time metrical general. It's using
It is.
and quantum electrodynamics, even Feynman would say, or whatever, the 0 point is full of energy. And
Absolutely.
it's used, and Hal Puthoff talks a lot about, polarizable vacuum that you can electrically polarize. And so it's using kind of creating a gradient basically to propel an object. Is that right?
Some of your work has cited Max Born, Paul Dirac, and heavily
I talk
Hal
more
Puthoff.
to the Schwinger limit, breaking the Schwinger limit. Why do I talk about that? Not just because I want to make black holes, but the whole idea is that when you put more and more energy into a particular space-time locality, you can actually unravel what we understand as continuum, space-time continuum within that quantum vacuum limit. The Schwinger limit really, this whole idea of generation of particle antiparticle fields, this is exactly what the Schwinger limit needs. And it's on the order of 10 to the 33 watts per meter square, corresponding to an energy density on the order of 10 to the 25 joules per meter cubed.
Enormous amounts of energy.
Enormous. Speaking again to those electric field strength of 10 to the 18 volts per meter, commensurate with a B field on the order of 10 to the 9 volts per meter again.
What is the Schwinger limit?
The Schwinger limit truly, it represents how much energy density the quote-unquote quantum vacuum, or rather space-time fabric, can withstand before it breaks apart.
And how does this impact the black hole information limit, right? Because you've talked about this.
I've never looked too much into the information loss paradox.
Summarize what he said for sure. So basically, what you're saying is you're using this electromagnetic amplification methodology
to create this energy density. Yes.
To essentially break the fabric of reality in a way that uses it as propulsion. Is that right?
That's 100% correct. Because once you form this black hole, I truly believe that every black hole, quote unquote, has a white hole. There's a wormhole that truly forms between whatever that locality that you've broken the Schwinger limit and somewhere else that it talks to.
And then
based on the superforce, and believe it or not,
where does
quantum entanglement?
Where does spin kind of, how does spin involved here?
Spin.
Yeah.
Oh. So in other words, you can accelerate either in spin or accelerate in vibration, depending on which is easier from an engineering point of view. As you well know, when you spin something, even surpassing 10 to the 4 RPM, it's very hard to do so and keep this thing. So again, you might choose vibration. I just chose to put in both spin and vibration because the mathematics is highly similar.
So
but from an engineering point of view, you'd want to go with vibration.
When you say spin, do you mean spin like literally spinning a thing, not like electrical?
Around its own axis.
And this is interesting, right? There have been a number. There's a very common through line in a lot of alternate gravity manipulation approaches relating to either macroscopic spin vis-a-vis something called the POEMS theory, Pope-Osborne angular momentum synergy theory, something that Richard Eskridge looked into at Marshall. And then Alzafon's nucleonic spin approaches that he sort of scrubbed with Feynman back in the 30s.
Very complex, though.
Yeah. But then you've got Ming Lee's work with the rotating superconductor, the YBCO.
Also, Plekhanov used rotating superconductors. And I didn't realize this, but Nick Cook, who wrote The Hunt for Zero Point,
Great book.
He went up to Plekhanov and they were speaking. And for whatever reason, Nick Cook had this instinct to ask him about Victor Schauberger. And somehow,
interesting. Yeah.
And Plekhanov goes, "Yeah, my father was this Soviet agent at the time, or he was a Russian agent."
Yeah.
This was like, was Soviet.
Soviet.
Yeah. He said my father was a Soviet agent, and he was actually counter intel, and he was tasked with retrieving a lot of Schauberger's files. So Schauberger was one of the first people to talk about rotating, I think in his case, he had something called an impeller machine. This was pre kind of superconductivity.
Based on implosion rather than, right? The whole idea of creation, again, a physics based on creation rather than destruction.
Yeah.
Well, and do you think there's
but there was a connection between him and Plekhanov and this. Yeah. And then Plekhanov said, well, we just needed more higher RPMs.
But again, from an engineering point of view, you know how detrimental that can be.
It's very hard to do. It's a very
hard
exotic
to do.
environment.
And that's why I chose
what are you going to put in
vibration.
There? Yeah, sure.
And not just vibration of an electrically charged object, but plasma.
So you think that lineage doesn't make sense from an engineering standpoint? Actually, vibration makes more sense.
And you know why?
Yeah. I mean, because
why?
with plasmas,
let's listen to Jack. By the way, Jack is brilliant.
Idiot.
No, far from it. Jesse, please, 100%. That is totally unfair. Never, ever say that.
No, I mean, I'm just, you guys are more advanced than me. So,
well, there's interesting things you can do when you set up standing waves in plasmas. I mean, you can generate cold plasmas, as he was talking about. This is something I did in my graduate research back in the day, with certain frequencies that will pull electrons off of the atoms, and then you can start doing interesting things with those electrons, and you can set up double layer plasmas and things like this. And if you can control where the charge goes, I mean, this is the problem with a lot of hot fusion experiments, is that they can't control where the electrons go, they can't control where the hot ions go, and so you get all kinds of breaking radiation, you get Bremsstrahlung, and you get all kinds of tremendous losses. And this approach ameliorates that.
So that's why you need cold plasma for the vibration.
It's ideal, yes.
Interesting. And how do you produce cold plasma? It's the fourth energy.
Not easy.
Right.
That is E cubed.
Okay, got it.
Absolutely, we'll not touch on that.
Okay. It's in the academic literature, but perhaps we don't verify it.
Since after all, this is my so-called first in-person interview.
Yeah.
So I should offer something to the audience. It involves something that has been given the Nobel Prize physics, Nobel Prize in physics, I believe it was last year.
Non-local reality, guys?
Lasers.
Interesting.
Leave it there.
So that's a better approach then. And then what does this have to do with superconductivity, I guess?
Believe it or not, everything is related at the quantum vacuum level.
So I'll throw something out there. So in superconducting physics, so we have this baseline theory called BCS theory.
Bardeen-Cooper.
Yeah. So Bardeen, brilliant physicist, two Nobel Prizes, the transistor and superconductivity. And so most superconductors, their behavior is characterized by BCS theory. However, these are typically ultra low temperature superconductors and extremely high B field superconductors. So these are not terribly useful in industrial commercial application because the environments you have to put them in are very exotic. So of course, superconductivity is very useful because it offers lossless power transmission, very high electric fields, very high magnetic fields. I've often said that the development and discovery of a room temperature superconductor would be as transformative to commerce and industry as anti-gravity.
Very disruptive.
100%.
Extremely disruptive.
Now, so there's been a lot of research the last 30 or 40 years into topological materials, topological insulators, and then something called topological superconductors. And the nature of a topological material is, so typically you have crystal lattice materials. So metals are crystals, insulators are crystals, semiconductors are crystals. Ordinarily, those crystals have the same properties throughout the bulk of the matrix. Like no matter which way, frequently they're isotropic, meaning this way or that way, or they're anisotropic, meaning it's different this way versus that way. When you make semiconductor crystals, you get polycrystalline, so you get grain boundaries, and features stop at these grain boundaries, and so you start to get anisotropies. That's significant to manufacturing semiconductor materials, where we're doping these layers with different atoms. And we've been doping since the 1950s. I mean, this has been around some time, but the level of precision in semiconductor doping is 3 or 4 orders of magnitude lower than what we're talking about with these quantum heterostructured lattices, where you really need these big chromium and vanadium atoms that install their ferromagnetic ordering across the lattice. You need them in very specific lattice locations.
Jack, you're absolutely brilliant and right on. But let's bring it to a very simplistic, again, Occam's razor, simplicity and minimalism. What does superconductivity truly represent? A macroscopic quantum phenomenon.
Yes.
And it speaks directly to macroscopic quantum coherence. Look very carefully at slides 4 to 9 in the 2019 AIAA SciTech. A lot of people have gone over those slides as if there's nothing there. There's something of incredibly important
So
substance there.
how do you maintain coherence at macroscopic scales?
Not easy at all.
Condensates.
Because everything wants to decohere. Everything wants extremely cold temperatures. Again, the atoms being in this nice dance. Because again, because of electron Coulomb repulsion, these things don't want to pair up. And yet BCS theory says that they should. And Dr. Victor Lachno believes it's not the electrons but bipolarons. The whole idea of a bipolaron mechanism that occurs at these higher temperatures.
Which is a quasi-particle. It's a composite quasi-particle of two polarons. A polaron is itself a quasi-particle, which is...
And the Pais effect speaks directly to what? To this mechanism of room temperature superconductivity. How? It basically says once you form an alternating magnetic field, once you form this Bose-Einstein condensate that Victor Lachno speaks to, you can use a pulse current, again, an alternate current, to move it.
To move it, to manipulate it.
Room temperature superconductivity. And yet no one has touched on either the Victor Lachno paper or my patent.
How would
Thinking again, it's pseudoscience.
how would you do this?
So the reason generally you can't get superconductivity at high temperatures because the atoms in the material have all this thermal motion. They have all this thermal energy. And so the nature of superconductivity is that this thing called a phonon, which is a vibratory mode of an atom inside of a lattice, phonons facilitate the transfer of electrons through the lattice as Cooper pairs. So the Pauli exclusion principle only applies to spin 1/2 bosons. I know this is really deep, but what happens is when you force electrons close together, they behave as though they're a spin 1 particle, meaning Pauli no longer applies, and so they can both occupy the minimum ground state, so they can move together, so there's no degeneracy, there's no energy splitting, and so they move very efficiently through the lattice. Problem is, if this lattice is warm and all these atoms are vibrating randomly, you can't get this coherent phonon behavior. In extremely novelly comprised lattices, you put atoms in just the right place such that these internal magnetic fields set up these roadways, stop signs, highways for current to flow, and you can get this behavior.
So it would involve, you would need to fabricate materials on an atomic level. You need to get sub-inks.
But not the Pais effect. The Pais effect does not speak to anything depending on chemical composition. That's why Dr. Victor Lachno, he picked it up because he realized this is the solution to an active superconductor, one that's not passive, one that is not based on chemical composition,
So
like the type 1A or the type 2 superconductors. This is basically, it can be done as long as this thing at any point in its structure has been superconducting. For example, that's why I chose lead, zirconate, titanate. All three components at very low temperatures are superconducting.
Sure.
And yet, because of the bipolaron mechanism that Dr. Lachno, I believe in his paper, it's just a 3-page paper, but on the 3rd page, he gives the mechanism and he speaks to the Pais effect, room temperature superconductor. He believes it'll work.
So these materials are superconducting in their natural state, even at room temperature?
Not at room temperature, at very low temperature.
He's describing conventional superconductors, that
Right.
mean like YBCO and from
Lead, zirconate, titanate, PbZrTi. These are the components of what they call a piezoelectric material.
You know, Townsend Brown spent the latter half of his career looking at piezoelectric material.
They're very important
Yeah.
because one talks to, again, the whole idea that pressure-induced what? The electric field can also induce
Mhm.
pressure changes.
In the vacuum.
Well, I discovered something very interesting. The Townsend Brown's ceramic insulator of choice was
is
very
interesting.
Very
important.
tight. It's on
It
the
is
chalkboard
very
in
interesting.
videos of him at
And yet they
Mossy
have
Glass.
dismissed
This
his
is
work.
what changed my mind about
They have
Townsend Brown.
dismissed
And it's
his work.
Winter Haven. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they have dismissed his work.
And he
called the
says,
man a charlatan.
by the way, at
Maybe
the
they
beginning
didn't.
of Townsend Brown's Winter Haven proposal, he says Oliver Heaviside had a very adequate theory of gravity back in the 1890s, so we would be right to listen to him. So, that was his opinion as well.
I'm convinced that some well-meaning physicists just didn't see the application to exotic condensed matter physics at the time, because I think these are subtle effects for which the coupling is small in natural materials. And, as we started to manufacture semiconductors, this was the world's first metamaterial in the broad sense. It's not an optical metamaterial in the strict sense, and you start to set up these solid state environments that have fundamentally different environments. And we're just now getting to the point where we have the SEM tools to interrogate these things. And we have the chemical vapor deposition and the atomic vapor deposition to actually make them. And then we have the interrogation tools to know for sure what we really made. I mean, these experiments take years to set up and execute. That's why it's been...
They're not easy. They're not easy at all.
What would be the next step because let's build a UFO. I mean, if there was ever a time where we were, geopolitically unstable on a macro level and need to throw a Hail Mary, it would be right now. And I don't know what we have, Phil, maybe we're way more advanced than, what do you think? Do you think we're way more advanced than meets the eye? Or
I truly believe we must be. This democracy must win. This republic must stand. We must survive. So yes, I believe we shall.
Do you think that what you're looking into has already been discovered and then some in kind of private quarters? Or do you think that you're deriving something fundamentally?
Absolutely not. I do not think I'm an original in this at all. As a matter of fact, the physics that I speak to was available in the 1890s. And there were great physicists at the time.
So you
great brains. I'm 100% sure that I'm not an original in this. Not at all.
Many interesting
things. It's just
things.
the way that I address the Pais effect, especially from the room temperature superconductor. Now, the Pais effect driven room temperature superconductor, I do believe I'm an original in.
I would believe that.
And Victor Lachno attests to that. He says it could work. Now, for a man of his capacity, of his capability, of his mathematical prowess, and not just mathematical physics, we're talking physical mathematics, where the physics drives the mathematics, not vice versa. This man thinks that this could work. I believe it should be looked at.
Well, there are these claimed replications of room temperature.
Okay, 99.
Couple of years.
They referred.
You're the only English-speaking patent that's in the
Isn't that
citations. The rest
something?
are Korean and Chinese.
But everybody thinks it's a pseudoscience. How come?
Well, yeah. So, do you think that this has already been done? You think it's been discovered?
Do you know that team was so sure of their results that they published one paper with 6 authors and then they published another paper with 3 authors because only 3 people can share a Nobel Prize? They were that confident.
Whoa. Then what happened on the
There were people that replicated it.
Reproduction issues, yeah.
There were Chinese teams that replicated the experiment. It went into the void as if.
So you guys seem to lend a little more credence than meets the eye to now.
Maybe, yeah. I think I had heard there were reproduction issues. Other labs tried to make it, and I find it hard to believe like other labs would cover it up because again, it's
that would explain
grants galore waiting to happen.
You have talk to Lou Alexander, who I love. I think he's an American hero, great guy. When I speak to him, he really has to speak super cryptically about some very destructive could save the world, but also destroy the world. We all have to play nicely together, like the toy or whatever. Is he talking about room temperature superconductivity? Or
Who knows? Ask Lou.
Yeah.
The man doesn't drink, I believe, so you might not be able to get any information out of him. He's also a very, you can tell the man has seen a lot.
So on that note, on the subject of proliferation, I find it very fascinating to think about the fact that Manhattan, we got a little lucky in that nuclear weapons turn out to be very difficult to make. And so proliferation was slow. in terms of the weaponization of UAP physics, and we've of course mentioned there could be multiple branches and different tech trees. Do you have a sense that this technology will be difficult to replicate, difficult to manufacture,
No.
or very easy?
No. However, there's a paper out there, plasma compression fusion device. You and I were talking right before.
Yeah.
It's being cited by some very important and research teams in China. And the latest that's being cited is of this year, IEEE Journal of Cybernetics. Can you imagine making a plasma compression fusion device something compact? Now, in what artificial intelligence domain would cybernetics couple with if you were to use such a device? Say such a device was operational. It could be made operational in a small footprint, a power source, something like Iron Man's reactor. Could you imagine what you would use that in? Why would the IEEE Journal of Cybernetics be interested in that particular work? Think what that would mean.
Terrifying. I mean,
Terrifying.
There's so many ways. I mean, enormous energy densities are terrifying in every way.
But imagine an army of those. What they could mean. Leave it there, Jesse. Trust me on that. Leave it there.
It's freaky.
And it's very freaky. Again, the fusion of ideas, cross-domain, the ability of using information from different disciplines. That's in the open literature. That's why OSINT can be so incredibly important in the right hands, in cross-domain technologies, interdisciplinary, across those. OSINT could prove extremely dangerous.
It already has, and it already is. The use of AI tools in reverse engineering all of these ideas right out of the ether, right out of off the internet is very powerful already. I mean, it's helped a lot of us in the disclosure effort find things that are out there in the public domain that it just maybe we didn't realize they were already in the public domain.
However, it's also A cubed. Not a good idea.
Well, okay, so you also have written a lot about high frequency gravitational waves.
Yes, sir.
And so how does that play into all of this? And why don't we actually zoom out real quick and just explain how, okay, if you had a room temperature superconductor and then you had the Pais effect, how would this allow you to possibly build a UFO? Like, how does that play into,
I cannot speak to that. I cannot speak to that.
Okay.
But again, please, there is no such thing as faster than light travel. Einsteinian physics is never broken. Einstein was 100%. Everything Einstein has come up with is 100% real. And I truly believe that, for example, even quantum entanglement, we're not talking about instantaneous communication here.
So you don't believe that, like, a lot of people in national security disclosure world talk about Alcubierre warp drives, involving negative mass or negative energy to allow for faster than light travel. You don't think that's possible?
I do not believe that. Again, once you create this black hole, Einsteinian physics no longer truly applies. Think of the paradigm. Well, it's as if you have broken known physics to begin with. A whole, again, I choose not to call it new physics, but truly that's what it truly means.
Let's get a little, so as you hit the Schwinger limit, break space-time, what happens vis-a-vis this fifth dimension?
We'll not touch on that.
Okay.
We'll not touch.
What's interesting about Alcubierre drive, I think, is this notion of negative energy. And there have been people who have associated negative energy with quantum vacuum energy.
That's right.
So what's interesting is it could be the case that the Alcubierre approach and the quantum vacuum approach in fact arrive at the same result. They're just different paradigms for looking at the same thing. Yeah.
Correct.
But what's interestingly different is Alcubierre is a strictly Einsteinian notion in a manner of speaking. It operates entirely within general relativity. It doesn't require a TOE. It doesn't require new physics, whereas which also is somewhat unhelpful because it doesn't give us guideposts to new physics. It's not really informative in any way, whereas these kinds of approaches do require those things.
Absolutely.
Huge news, everyone. We've been sitting on a ton of unreleased footage that we will now be releasing weekly in our new WAP. Our first episode is a completely uncut Heated discussion between Hal Puthoff and Eric Weinstein on remote viewing. Yeah, you heard that right. I still can't believe I experienced that firsthand, and now I'm happy to share it with you all as our first exclusive video on WAP. Head over to wap.com/American Alchemy Premium to become a premium member today. By becoming a member, you'll gain access to weekly premium videos, behind-the-scenes footage, and monthly group calls where we discuss the ideas we love most. Plus, you'll get early access to merchandise drops and be the first to know about the upcoming conference we'll be holding later in 2025. Our WAP community will serve as a private space where curious individuals and tech enthusiasts can come together to challenge the status quo and explore ideas shaping our future. If you're passionate about exploring unconventional ideas and want to dive even deeper into our content, I invite you to join our WAP today. Head over to wap.com/American Alchemy Premium to become a premium member today. Thank you so much and enjoy the rest of today's episode.
Can you talk about how high frequency gravity waves might allow for UFO-like activity? Or
I would rather not.
okay,
I would rather not.
Well, I did
not go there.
I found it interesting that
It could all, and that's just because it can be weaponized. So
It can be.
Well, let's not go there. Well, I did find it interesting, just high level, that
I believe Evgeny Podklednov has hit on something already. And if it's true that he has made this impulse gravitational generator, wow, scary.
because he's sort of
Because he's funded
Russian,
by the Russians.
and he's in
So what do they have?
Once upon a time, I was told he was working for an American contractor.
Is he?
I thought he might be
Because the latest rumors is that
I had heard
he is
Boeing.
repatriated.
Phantom War. Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope.
No,
Yeah.
I think he's.
I'm pretty sure he's repatriated.
Okay, so this is
Yeah,
really,
but
this is a
anyway,
really
yeah.
scary setup, because basically it's funny because after this conversation, I'm neurotic about this conversation, but I'm so much less neurotic about outing Townsend Brown, who I'm sure is right, because that is so far down the chain of like, it's like so not dangerous. And it's to me, it's absurd from an American national security standpoint that like it would at all be controversial to destigmatize him. You know, he's this scientist. He was also a Navy scientist.
He was a great man.
Great man.
He is a
He
great man.
stigmatized his own work, probably for good reason, because at the time, I think it was the tip of the sphere.
Absolutely.
And it was this Cold War secrecy era. But just based on this conversation, it sounds like all nations are pretty far advanced as far as these heterodox frameworks. And if you're the US, you need to be getting as many young people aware of these things as soon as humanly possible, at least from a high level.
Yeah. Otherwise, where the hell's the talent going to come from?
Yeah. Like, seriously.
Yeah. And Weinstein has spoken on this too. And I think, I think there's missing names. Like, what's going on? Who's actually working on it? Right.
Right. Totally. Or even just like, what are the proper frameworks? It's like, finally, it seems like string theory is capitulating after getting bashed over the head for the last, 10 years by polemicists. They've seemed like not a super, self-aware crowd up until like maybe the last couple of years. They're all saying, like Leonard Susskind just went on Theories of Everything. Kurt Genlund, great interviewer. It's like, I think we've kind of,
with the cap on
very poorly. Yeah. So, but it just would, you would expect some sort of coordinated effort on high when it comes to the American national security state, when it comes to letting this stuff out. And I always feel like, I'm sort of in an awkward position with it, for example, with the Townsend Brown stuff, where clearly that was the right thing to do, but it's in retrospect, every having this sort of conversation, and, it's like, you never know what the right thing is.
I suspect some of this has to do with the fact the majority of the program was executed during the Cold War. And I think perhaps at one time we were quite certain that we were the only ones with anything. And we thought, worst case scenario, we put a big footprint on this. And just like Manhattan, the adversary infiltrates the program and steals what we've gotten. And all of a sudden, there's this proliferation of next generation weapons of mass destruction, as I spoke to Dave Grush about. And maybe they thought for the longest time, max priority is bury it. Keep it totally, totally silent. No one knows it exists. Distant second priority. Glean as many technical insights from it as you can every once in a while. And unfortunately, somehow, eventually, they did get it, either through their own crash retrievals or infiltrating our program, whatever it might be. And now there is a race, and we are not in first.
That's wild. What do you think is it first?
Oh, if I had to guess between Russia, China, I'd say China. They're not distracted with a regional war. They have a significant amount of resources to put towards it.
They've repatriated a lot of their alumni from this country.
Yeah. Every year, China graduates more STEM professionals than exist in the entire United States.
They're brilliant.
Yeah.
How many times they've won the math Olympiads? You think that's simple?
Sure.
And do you think it's probably, it's like the 3-body problem or whatever, the PRC, if they want you to work on some highly classified stuff, they just knock on your door. And here it's just this complicated, bureaucratic, you have all these corporate fiefdoms with local incentives taking shots at one another.
I truly think that one day we must unite the factions, because I think one day we shall have...
One day? You need now. What do you mean?
Listen, as soon as possible, because I think we have an external enemy. And by external enemy, I mean...
Very external.
Very external.
What are you talking about?
NHI.
NHI.
So...
The doomer take?
So, yeah, what evidence do we have? Because, when you speak to Lou Elizondo, you have sort of this idea that something is imminent, possibly hostile contact. Maybe they're prepping the battle space. I tend to think, at least historically looking back.
Think of the Earth.
Okay.
People have warred for less than the place of extreme natural resources. We are a very yummy apple.
Yeah, but do you have any...
Everybody's eye.
Sure, but it's you have thousands of years of history where we haven't had contact, or maybe if we have had contact, at least it's ephemeral enough where our modern historical perspective, I believe we've had contact for thousands of years, but in this weakly entangled ephemeral way, in a way that, if you were to talk to a conventional historian, they would not say that, they'd say we're alone, we're at the top of the consciousness food chain. So do you guys have any information that I don't when it comes to something coming down the pike? As far as hostile content?
Well, there are people who feel strongly that there have been reset events, right? Human history reset events. For instance, 70,000 years ago, we know genomically there was a bottleneck. There was a human bottleneck event where, something like 7,500 members of the population are our descendants or our ancestors. Yeah. And I don't know what to think of that. I mean, I don't really necessarily see the purpose, but you do have to speculate. There's so many degrees of freedom associated with what are their motives? Are they resource constricted in some way? What continues to be interesting in 50,000 years?
But isn't it fairly well documented that was, Luis Walter Alvarez, the father who was in the Manhattan Project, they had this theory that, an asteroid hit the Earth, wiped out the dinosaurs around that period. And then you get this Cambrian explosion of new life.
Right.
So that doesn't feel like non-human intelligence to me.
No. I don't mean extinction level event resets. I mean more recent than that, like in human history. For instance, the Toba event and the Randall Carlson stuff and the Graham Hancock stuff, the reset 12,000 years ago. Younger
guys, but that might be just been a common airburst from the Torsion.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, fully agree.
So
it's not committal.
Okay, so but then this again, you need more evidence if you're going to say that non-human contact that's hostile is coming down the pike.
Well, there's a book out there.
Okay, what's the book?
Charles Ford, Book of the Damned. It starts with very interesting words. It's, I believe we are property. ... Read that book. It's very interesting.
Sure.
It's for your audience. Let them look into this. Little breadcrumbs.
We're property.
So we are property.
So we're already colonized.
What are we? Again, the whole idea of, are we a civilization with amnesia? As a certain gentleman.
Well,
Graham Hancock,
sure. Well, we definitely seem to, follow this local incentive scarcity gamified thing that doesn't seem like it's in the best interest of our race ascending into anything, more real. And that's the thing that attracts me to the whole UFO phenomenon, for all its weird cast of characters and, a Hall of Mirrors vibes. It feels like a somewhat transcendent topic where, maybe we can ascend out of our
I think we will soon enough anyway, face a tremendous threat from without. And I believe, as the great Ronald Reagan once said, if we do not come together as a unified Earth, we will not withstand what's coming.
do you think it's already, I mean, you have these rumors of like, you know, the gray aliens sort of collecting biological samples.
I do not know. I truly do not know.
Why do you
There's
think we have
almost
imminent
this-
contact? Because that's a really big assertion.
Do you ascribe to the battlefield preparation hypothesis that the vehicles acting aggressively with fighter planes, that the vehicles, overflying
Of
the
course they're
missile
testing
fields
us.
and shutting missiles off?
Of course, they're
that's
testing us.
Do
hostile.
you think so?
Oh, and that's why we should be very careful on putting all our money into reverse engineered ET craft because they already have their own technologies. They know how to defeat their own thing.
What if there's good factions and bad factions? Like when I speak to Robert Hastings,
I'm praying for that because otherwise we do not have a chance in hell.
well, a lot of the nuclear stuff is like shutting down silos, and then a lot of the messaging that people get seems to be like, you're going to destroy yourselves in some sort of nuclear holocaust, and you need to come together now and focus more on the environment and that sort of thing. So,
Right. It's like green PC type things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's not some tricksterism. You know, it's hard to say. Is all I'm saying. We need to maintain that.
If there are multiple, yes, I completely agree. If there are multiple actors in the space, it's incredibly hard to attribute what to what.
Mm.
Yeah.
How does your work, Sal, connect with the great Hal Puthoff?
I read a lot of his papers, and he is great indeed. Don't forget, I believe this man, if he was not connected with things that are taken as non-scientific and pseudoscience, like remote viewing, is deserving of a Nobel Prize, truly, especially the physical review paper on gravity, and that's
What
pure,
is this paper?
pure brilliance.
What does he say about gravity?
When he describes gravity as an emergent property of the underlying space-time foam, and it's put off like seminal work of space-time.
So if you
physics and
can
physical
electrically
engineering.
polarize the vacuum, then you can manipulate gravity like you can manipulate variables in Maxwell's equation.
Yeah, and he's the first to talk about that.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's funny, he was touching on it in my interview with him and Eric Weinstein, and we didn't quite get into like the mechanism, because this idea, I think, you know,
Eric couldn't believe that he worked on remote viewing. I could tell that, again, for a Harvard trained mathematician, the idea of even remote viewing being possible is such an abnormality.
What do you think of remote viewing?
I think remote action is possible.
so that's even farther than remote viewing.
Can you imagine stopping at heart just by thinking about it? Say from Qatar.
That's scary.
That's some scary shit. Anyway, who needs the CIA's heart-stopping gun when you can do it with a thought?
Well,
Anyway,
Well,
I
and
won't go
there are rumors about the fact that there was other teams of remote viewers being trained by Pat Price and Joe McGonigal, other than Puthoff.
yeah, there are rumors that it's still going on. And I mean, even if you read skim articles at the Pentagon, it was definitely still going on in the context of OSAP. But like, you know, I don't think it ended in 1995. I mean, you have Joseph McMoneagle won the Legion of Merit for over 200 times, which he helped collect intelligence, hostage cases, drawing up, you know, nuclear sites, that sort of thing. You don't just end a program like that. It just wouldn't make sense. But
Yeah.
I also think we're figuring out more and more possible physical models of consciousness that might explain remote viewing. So if the brain is a hybrid quantum classical system, which, you know, Penrose would be one model. And I don't know if microtubules are the right thing, but they can maintain coherence up until the, you know, single point, you know, the gravitational limit or whatever.
That's important.
And if that's the case, then in quantum systems, you have temporal non-locality, and you can reverse cubic positions in quantum computations.
Correct.
And so if you get into a working quantum computer, maybe you can send information on the application like back in time. Many people building quantum computers say that.
That's right.
So if your brain is a hybrid, you know, quantum classical computer, maybe you are accessing shards of information from the future, especially if you're given confirmatory.
How does
feedback.
the brain prevent decoherence? That's the question I should.
Probably through non-abelian statistics, just like the Pais effect.
So how would you, that must be, you know, some meditation technique or something?
No, I'm sorry. Non-abelian statistics, it's like Fermi-Dirac statistics. It's a type of particle statistic model that emerges from standard model physics.
I know from a
Oh,
mathematical perspective, but like a dog isn't doing vector calculus when he's catching a frisbee, like
Right.
what protocol should we do
It's very interesting.
to maintain coherence? Sal,
Great question.
Sal, what do you think?
Great question.
What do we do?
Great question. Jack, what do we
How do we get to the fifth dimension? How do we hit the Schwinger limit with
EQ?
oh my God.
Oh, I'm 100%. For example, in these UAP phenomena, they speak of a mind-matter connection.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So it's definitely there.
Yeah.
But there must be a there
And a
must be an
psionic.
intermittent medium. What is that intermittent medium?
It has occurred to me that
The
these.
vacuum itself?
Oh, yeah.
What else can be there? The medium for which, how does light transfer?
Through photons?
But you're saying where's the medium? Because every other wave has to move through a medium, you know,
Medium,
The ether? I don't know.
something.
the quantum vacuum.
Sure.
But is it at the superforce level? Is that at the Planck scale?
Right.
Are we talking about, I mean, the superforce, we talk about 10 to the 44 Newton.
It has to be in a fifth dimensional state.
It would have to be,
Which Ken Shoulders talks about fifth dimensional space for exotic vacuum object.
yeah, I suppose it doesn't have to be. It's not necessarily required that we have higher dimensional spaces. I mean, there could always, so Kaluza-Klein, compactified subdimensions, it has problems, but the general notion of higher dimension, it solves some problems. It explains the hierarchy problem. It explains the gravitational weakness problem. Why is gravity, 31 orders of magnitude weaker than the strong nuclear force or something?
And remember what Kaluza thinks of electrical charge is what? Motion in the fifth dimension.
Really
How interesting.
fascinating. It was interesting.
Fascinating.
I was reading from Frontiers of Propulsion Science by Eric Davis.
Great book, by the way.
He's
Eric W. Davis, no matter what he says on my physics, the man must be congratulated for that book, just for that book alone.
I brought my copy.
Him and Mark Millis are amazing, but you can tell that the real forte behind the physics is Dr. Davis.
well, he says
My hat off to him.
he says something around the Liefeld-Brown effect, which he believes, and that was from the book. If you take it at face value, that's just coronal wind or ionic wind, and it's not actually a tie between electromagnetism and gravity. But I think at one point he says you would need a fifth dimensional space to connect EM and gravity if this were to actually work. So
Exactly.
very interesting.
I think fundamental.
Oh, Dr. Davis is very intelligent.
How does torsion play in that?
Causative. Oh, Jack, please.
Well, so one of my favorite subjects.
Now we're going into heavy pseudoscience for everyone out there.
So here's what's funny is that
This is all fake.
That's right, brother.
if you talk about Heaviside as a more fundamental treatment of Maxwell, similarly, Einstein-Cartan is a more fundamental treatment of Einstein, because Einstein felt the torsional tensor should be treated symmetrically in free space and therefore zero out. T21 minus T12 equals 0. And Eli Cartan came around and said, no, you can't make that assumption. There could be exotic environments where this is a non-zero contributor. And so basically the two contributions to gravitational force in a geometric context are curvature to space-time and a twist to space-time. So torsion is the twist. And what makes that interesting from a gravity manipulation standpoint is that contents of the torsional tensor are the spin density tensor, which can contain contributions from electromagnetic spin. So if you can do really novel things with spin, either by coupling electron spin to nucleonic spin, or maybe like you're talking about axial spin to harmonic vibratory modes that sort of blow up real fast, you can maybe generate really large contributions to the spin density tensor and get these torsional repulsion fields that act like gravity, look like gravity, but technically they're not exactly gravity.
No.
Wow.
However, they can couple to it
Yeah.
under certain conditions.
Yes.
So then you could basically, because gravity can't traditionally manipulate in the lab, so you might be able to manipulate in the lab.
Again, the whole idea of the graviton itself being a spin 2, whereas the photon spins
Yeah.
1.
Yeah. Now, in the broader context, torsional physics is not a theory of everything. It's just going to be a piece of a more complete theory of gravity that slots into some broader theory of quantum gravity.
Interesting. Do you think? Oh, so that's fascinating. But this would be torsional physics a way to manipulate gravity that binds to gravity more tightly than traditional, transverse Hertzian electromagnetic waves.
Along the lines of multiple tech trees, this could be one of those branches that's important and significant.
That's fascinating.
And
What do you think of, you mentioned Greer, you were watching this stuff and that's sort of inspiring. Some of the work did Bob Lazar. Do you think that he was?
I think Lazar is right on the money. I'll tell you the truth. When I saw in the superforce equation, C to the fourth divided by big G being the superforce, and that talking as a linear operator really to the spatial temporal geometric structure, thereby giving rise to energy density. When I saw that, and I remember his words that this sports model is as if it was 3D printed on space-time. That's exactly what that equation says. So that means that they had the capability to manipulate the space force at a Planckian level. We'll talk about a physics that it's unfathomable. Oh, that's why I'm saying they could, that's
This is root access.
That's pretty well. And so what about his idea of gravity A, gravity B, two different types?
I don't know about that.
It's occurred to me maybe it's curvature gravity and torsional gravity.
Could be.
Interesting.
I know.
It could be different
I don't like
explanation of some
encouraging
of
him,
the
but
Well, no,
Yeah.
I've come around on those. I never fully ruled.
Rogan says that he believes Lazar.
Yeah.
So do I. I believe Lazar is not saying
I'm starting to too. Well, I think it was
anything.
pushed out by Intel, I believe, because John Lear gave the files to George Knapp. And so maybe it was like at the time that the Majestic 12 was coming out, I think a lot more about the Majestic 12 was correct as well. And that would maybe went by another name, and there are a couple, false names in there, whatever. But that's how kind of passage material works. That's how, recruiting works, where you have to give it a quacky veneer or whatever. So I don't quite, maybe believe the story fully prima facie, but I think he experienced some real stuff. Yeah.
He most
and he
likely
was given passage material. Maybe some of it was authentic.
No matter what
something
he did on the
anomalous.
side, and no
Yeah.
matter,
Yeah,
don't forget this guy actually knew Teller.
right.
Teller did not approach anybody that was so. We're talking about one of the greatest physicists of all time. If it wasn't for his thing with Oppenheimer and how much Oppenheimer was loved by the rest of the physics community,
Right.
Edward Teller would be remembered forever as one of the geniuses of our time. Remember, this is the man that not only is responsible for the Teller-Ulam device,
Yeah.
but for something called Project Sundial. It's unclassified. Look into it.
Well, if it's unclassified,
So
what happened?
look into it.
They say,
Imagine creating something instead of 50 megatons, the Russian Tsar Bomba. Imagine something billion.
whoa.
Yeah, he wanted 100 gigaton.
Oh,
I don't know
Project
why.
Sundial.
Jesus
Oh,
Christ.
man was an absolute genius from every
Whoa, genius.
He believed.
he had no
no,
limits.
he
Yeah.
rightly believed. No earth, no world in its right mind. We're all sane. Trust me, we are sane as an earth. That's why we must come together unified
Yeah,
somehow.
I'm down with that amount of energy.
No. He believed that no sane world would ever execute such a weapon. So just the very existence of such a weapon, knowing
Sure.
that you have that sword, this is the sword of Damocles. The man must have been very well versed in the classics. Sword of Damocles, always hanging above your head. Nobody is crazy enough.
We have enough of a sword of Damocles, in my opinion. But what do you think? Because you made an interesting. You've been talking a lot about Heaviside here,
Yeah,
and him being, kind of an inspiration for you along the way.
absolutely.
I interviewed another Navy scientist who actually was anonymous in my Townsend Brown episode.
Mhm.
He talked about this framework of extended electrodynamics. So he talked about the original 21 Maxwell's equations and a more faithful adherence to those equations and the quaternarian,
The Quaternion, yeah.
being somehow essential to all these new exotic electromagnetic waves beyond the transverse Hertzian waves. So scalar waves, scalar longitudinal waves, things like that. Do you agree with that model, or?
I believe there are many roads that lead to Rome.
Okay.
I understand that view because they believe there's that truly what we're seeing, again, the whole idea of the Aronoff Bohm effect. The whole idea is that what's true is the vector and the scalar potentials, not the electric field per se and the B field. It's the way you look at it, the way you use, again, physics should drive the mathematics, not the other way around. I truly believe that.
What's interesting is I read a paper recently, because I've always been skeptical of longitudinal scalar wave theory, but I read it primarily because we don't see them. So the question is I'm fundamentally an empiricist. Where are we going to see these?
Yeah.
Well, what's interesting is apparently there's a possibility of mistaking very small subharmonics in AC waveforms mistaking longitudinal scalar waves for subharmonics. So the notion was if you expose some kind of a novel matrix, something like what we were talking about, that sort of pulls the waveform apart in the same manner that a prism pulls apart, light wave and shows you the different frequencies, that you might see something novel out of that you're like, wait a second, that's not normal. That's perhaps your scalar wave. So there's a possible experimental approach to verification or discrediting.
And don't forget the fundamental papers of E.T. Whittaker.
Yeah.
1904, 1905, British mathematician by the name of E.T. Whittaker writes these two fundamental papers whereby he actually shows that scalar waves, non-Hertzian, so non-transverse waves are feasible.
Interesting.
As a matter of fact, wasn't it Colonel Tom Bearden that mentioned?
Yeah, Tom Bearden talks about scalar physics. There's a guy now named Lee Hively who publishes papers about Woodside. There's another guy who publishes papers about extended electrodynamics and these other wave types.
I mean, these things are not expressly forbidden. So
no, anything that's not forbidden by physics is allowable.
Yeah, and the air not.
Now, is it engineerable?
Right.
That depends on the genius of some people.
Well, you need to polarize the vacuum again, right? Because it's all about in the Lorentz equation, right? Having a sort of a gauge where the scalar and vector potentials are automatically kind of negated or equal zero, but back, there might actually be room for real scalar and longitudinal or scalar and vector potentials that are present, even if a magnetic field is not present. And that the prosaic explanation for that is the electromagnetic force potential, but a lot of the proponents of extended electrodynamics say that actually explains this stuff way better.
This is why I think condensed matter physics is the most exciting field of physics today, because these things are being interrogated.
And please don't forget Nikola Tesla.
Yeah.
His idea of radiant energy is based on what? Scalar waves.
Scalar waves. Yeah, interesting. Very interesting. Well,
he was totally against Hertz, by the way.
Was he?
Tesla was very outspoken. Known to be anyway.
Because he thought his own these exotic waves. Well, he was experimenting.
And don't forget, Einstein thought that Tesla was the most intelligent man in the world at one point in time. This is Einstein.
I've never interacted. I've never consumed Einstein's commentary about Tesla. That's interesting.
Well, it's funny. Tesla and Townsend Brown were doing the same thing. Tesla was doing similar stuff to what Townsend Brown was at the end of his career at Warby Cliff and in Colorado Springs. Extremely high voltages across short distances where you would expect to get these kind of anomalous effects, rips. And
somebody should ask the president-elect about his uncle.
Well, you want to know the one interview with John Trump is available in a documentary on the Philadelphia experiment. Philadelphia experiment is this quacky psyop, experiment with Townsend Brown involved. There probably was a real thing going on underneath the veneer, the fake thing that was distributed that Townsend Brown actually pulled off. But John Trump gets interviewed in this documentary by Bill Moore, and John Trump was tasked with looking through Tesla's files when they confiscated him from his apartment in New York. Yeah. And so he was the national security. He was very close with Vannevar Bush. If there is a legacy UFO program, John Trump had to. He was the top radar expert in the country. I think he even owned a company called High Voltage LLC or something like that.
I believe Tesla physics, quote unquote, can bring these things down. This is our trump card.
Mm-hmm.
I truly believe
bring what stuff?
It's the genius of Nikola Tesla that will one day help us in the upcoming, let's say, if there's such a thing, a cosmic war.
Oh, you're saying invasion? Well, that's what Greer says. I don't like to talk about that. I think that's I think we shouldn't mess with the stuff and let them decide. Let them decide. I think they're way more advanced.
Again, I believe we are property.
Oh man, I think they're factions, and I think they're good initiatory factions, and then they're bad, malevolent, more actively fucking with us faction.
Well, interesting math emerges when you look at the sheer number of galaxies, the sheer number of stars per galaxy, the age of the universe, the number of emergent species that can emerge from a given planet. The numbers blow up very quickly. So this notion of 1, 2, 3, 4 species gets really strange. Like, why aren't there 25,000? Why aren't there 30,000?
Yeah.
And so I think so on the nuts and bolts side, I think there are power scaling restrictions in play that restrict how far you can go with any sort of FTL technology. But at the same time, I think it informs the political landscape.
Yeah. Well, we assume, right, this like binary angels and demons or angels or demons.
Right.
But there's no gray zone.
Well, if you have a hierarchy of being, it's likely more of a Cambrian explosion, more diversity on the food chain above you, maybe even then below you or whatever, because you have these, all sorts of path dependencies. And so maybe it just gets extremely complex.
As a counterpoint, Peter Thiel gave a very interesting interview where he talked about how he thinks there's an argument for the fact that there might be selective forces that lead to one very good and one very bad.
Yeah.
And this could give rise to the binary. And I ran a space on it and we talked about it, and it's very controversial because there are people that hate this interpretation.
Well,
but I think it's very compelling.
Well, it's compelling.
But it's biblical.
It's biblical. Yeah.
It is.
The war
between
the children of light and the children of darkness.
If it ever felt apocalyptic, it does now. I mean, look at what's going on. You look at where the war is actually taking place. It's pretty wild. It feels like we're in the book of Revelation, but also
Truly, end of time.
It's weird. But like, I think the point he was making was that tech itself is a forcing function. And so if you have warp drive tech, if you have faster than light tech, you never see it coming. It's hard to have the defense against that.
That was an excellent point.
And so because of that,
It is.
you either have to inflect towards this like totalitarian, total clamp down, one world government state, or you need to inflect towards like complete altruism and like heart centeredness.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have one, maybe you'll be okay, with the warp drive tech, and it'll be saving of humanity. And if you have the other, you need total control, but I hope we don't flood in that direction.
I believe the physics that will win is the physics that's based on creation and destruction.
So Victor Schauber, well, how do we get to it? Because a lot of this conversation is, it's fascinating and it's mind opening, but it's also bleak and scary because it's starting to dawn on me just how we live in a multipolar world, and you have these exotic lineages of physics that all of these countries are somewhat privy to, and they're very destructive. And so how do we get to a more generative, heart-centered, positive version of physics and the global landscape?
Many roads lead to Rome, but there's only one Via Appia.
Only one what?
Via Appia. The one that the aqueduct was built along. It was the major road that led to Rome. So there could be many roads that led to Rome, but there was one of choice. It was usually followed by the legions. There may be just one way of doing it right. Can we find it before something tragic happens?
What do you think that way is? There's that
Unification.
But it can't just be a physics solution.
Can we re-engineer human nature? I once asked that of Kurt Jaimango. I think he's still thinking on it. Can we re-engineer human nature? That's where the secret of all this lies. What are we? Who are we?
What do you think?
I think it's possible. But again, I think it demands a great effort on our part to leave our individualistic ways and come together as one collective who are willing to live in total equality. See, Marx attempted that. He did. And yet, the practice of Marxism resulted in tremendous atrocities, the pogroms.
Well, he was diagnostically.
And you could say
Yeah.
that it was the Leninist uprising and the revolution that led to Nazism, that led to National Socialism. So in other words, everything came from trying to put this idea of equality into practice, but in the wrong manner, because it formed elitism. Once you have elitism into the equation, you've destroyed everything.
Well, it's just so anathema to human nature in Marxism. And maybe it's sort of diagnostically somewhat correct as far as how capitalism creates these sort of alienation dynamics or whatever. But prescriptively, it's just so beyond idealistic.
But isn't it a beautiful thought, the equality of man?
I think, man, I like, I don't like meritocracy. I think is overused and kind of in an annoying way, but meritocracy is way better than equality. So like the idea that we're all like, for equal outcomes or whatever, that's crazy. Maybe some sort of, equal footing or opportunity, but that even you end up in these sort of never ending conversations of how exactly to engineer that
Right.
in these sort of technocratic ways that lend themselves actually to power co-option ultimately of people that don't even care about those things. It's sort of a bait and switch. And so I don't know. I think it's a really hard conversation. If the 20th century was a refutation of anything, it was a refutation of these technocratic ideologies where you could engineer society into anything. You had all these utopian ideologies and none of them worked. Nazism, Bolshevism, communism, Trotskyist, Marxism, they all failed.
No.
And, I think it really was a refutation. It's the most deadly century we've ever had. So I don't know how we get out of this, but it feels like it has to be a much more individual kind of.
Maybe we need a common enemy from the outside.
No, that doesn't seem really good or charismatic at all.
You think that there would be an enemy from within? There would be a fifth column, that there would be people taking their side?
Well, I think the right thing is
Scary, yeah?
the right thing is to look within. It's to really, really look at yourself, think about who you are, and fix what's broken there. And I think that's probably a better path individually.
I think we've seen enough microcosms of the outside enemy to assert, unfortunately, that there would be fifth columns in some manner of speaking.
That's what the problem is.
What do you mean?
And again, that would only...
There'd be some disruption to the idea of global unity by way of an external, because the ideology is that there'd be some.
So we must go with the most
unity,
basic of units, the re-engineering of human nature itself.
Do we have enough self-awareness to do so?
I don't know if I believe in that in some sort of psyop way. Well, yeah. What is an open question? What do you guys think, Reagan meant? What you have rumors, right, of like MacArthur.
Why would he have said it in a plain session of the United Nations?
So this is the story is that Reagan was speaking with Gorbachev. Gorbachev tells this story that and he says it in an interview, I think with Charlie Rose or something. And Reagan whispers to him right before the conversation starts. He says, hey, if aliens invaded, would you have our back? Kind of compadre on that and defend the Earth together. And Gorbachev was extremely taken aback, but this idea of kind of astral politics or something. Do you think that and this idea that MacArthur, there were rumors that
I'm interested though. What was Gorbachev's? Was it in the affirmative?
I think it was. He said yes, Mr. President, we would defend you.
He meant it too. I'm pretty sure.
Is that real though? I mean, is that like Reagan like kind of messing with him or?
Sometimes you have leaders that are meant to be there at the right time, under the right circumstances. I believe they're born for that particular purpose, to make sure that Earth is not pushed toward the precipice of perdition. Maybe we're meant to have a certain balance between the children of darkness and the children of the light.
What do you mean?
Equilibrium. And yet everything happens far away from equilibrium. Everything that's physically important. How interesting.
Well, it's not, but we're speaking of a mystic. What's going on? What do you mean?
I don't know. Jack, throw some light on that.
Analogously to the Pais effect, which takes place far from equilibrium, where you can see these novel behaviors in the bulk.
Yeah.
You have you have average behavior, you have average outcomes. And so he's making an analogy to that.
Well, yeah, I mean, you have like thermodynamic laws around that.
Right.
And then it does seem like all of these exotic effects I get into are like a result of like quote unquote high energy physics or like extremely granular manipulation of, materials or whatever.
Mm.
And so it's like, you're pushing the boundary. It's like, you have this, Ken Wilson was this CERN physicist. He had this concept of renormalization.
That's right.
It's like, it's really used to describe phase transitions in materials, but it's like,
who was against it? Someone spoke against that idea, saying that it's like putting infinities under the rug. It's like sweeping infinities under the. Was it Feynman?
I don't know, but I'm just using it really philosophically,
Right,
just like pushing systems to their logical boundary. In your case, the Schrödinger one day,
Right.
You get kind of weird effects. Like it is a famous quote of Agnew Bonson, who's sponsoring the Chapel Hill conference and kind of creates quantum gravity, which sends physics down a cul-de-sac because string theory.
Very strange what happened.
Very interesting, but he's also funding Townsend Brown's work back of the house. And he says strange phenomena occur.
And you have more incredible names. You have Bryce and Cecil DeWitt.
Yeah.
You have John Wheeler, and you have Louis Witten.
I wanted to ask you, Bryce DeWitt in 1968 writes a paper about superconductors and gravitational drag. Does that connect with your work at all?
No comment.
All right. Yeah. No, it's a lot of odd characters there. The whole conference, who it was sponsored by? Sponsored by Wright Airfield.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So very, very interesting history. And Agnew Bonson himself, who's the patron, writes a book about man-made UFOs called The Stars Are Too High. Actually, it's about this plan to unite the world via this man-made UFO invasion. But he also, says strange things occur at high megavolts across short distances. And he's describing Townsend Brown's work. So it's clear that pushing things to the limit, even plasma itself, is the fourth energy state. We can't go beyond that, at least conceptually.
That's right.
You get some more greater truths by pushing the boundaries in science.
It's true. It's true. Must always push the boundaries. Yeah.
But is that this Faustian Promethean thing? Are you playing with fire when you push the boundaries? You're sort of immanentizing if tech is an apocalyptic forcing function, are you immanentizing the eschaton when you do that? And is that a bad thing?
It's most certainly a point of inflection.
Beautiful
forcing
question.
function.
Now, that's a great question. Gorgeous question.
Thank you, Sal.
It's true. Jack, you want to attack that one?
It's most certainly a point of inflection forcing function, such that when you approach it, something perhaps some black swan event is going to take place. And I think that's where we talk about things that are way far from equilibrium.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Is these are founder events.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The world is inflecting, we're in a weird timeline, and
Extremely, very strange one in time. Time. Who thinks that there may be I've always said this, and I will hold this to my dying breath. The whole idea is that I describe matter as condensed, or rather, how do I say it? I say it in a certain way. Contained energy, or rather energy that's contained, that's bound within fields and frozen in a quantum of time. Who believes in
confined in a quantum of time.
That's it. Confined. That came, no joke, out of the quantum vacuum. I choose not to use the term ether because Einstein was so much against the idea of Luft, even though he introduces it in 1921 in a paper.
But everybody goes back on it. He says actually the ether is compatible with
our orthodox physicists that already believe me as pseudoscientists and crackpot and stuff. I don't want to force.
Do you think that in your lifetime, on a sort of more mass audience scale, you get vindicated in your work? Because
it's a dream, brother. It's an absolute dream.
Well,
do you know how many tears and sweat and blood and freaking nightmares and sleepless nights I've had It just that's why the Lackner paper means so much to me. That's why I honor that man. We're supposed to not like the Russians and not like the Chinese. We all people, brother.
Yeah.
We all people, and that's why sometimes I pray for this external enemy, because it's the one thing that will create a forcing function to unify us once and for all, a united Earth, as it should be. Anyway.
Do you think you should want a Nobel Prize?
Nah, please, but Putov, absolutely.
So.
Oh, yes. Dr. Putov, that paper is one of the papers that got me thinking.
He's so early on everything. He's just implicated in...
I'm pretty sure that he's had many a sleepless night too, and concerned about what others have thought of him.
Well, he's 88, and he's still completely lucid. I saw him maybe a month and a half ago or something. We watched James Fox's documentary together. He's just sharp as a tack. He's an
incredible geek. What a mind, that man.
I love that guy. And I felt, especially when I met him, maybe 2018-ish, 2019. And like, I felt really crazy and thinking about a lot. All this stuff now, like in vogue, like, UFO celebrities. Back then I felt totally quacky because I was like really into it. So I felt like a deep resonance with he was like the one guy who I felt like was somewhat credible, who really there was a resonance.
It's very incredible.
I think,
but because
the deeper I've got, so rigorous, I realize he is. And just for context for the audience, Magenta was a rumored crash, I believe, in Bologna, Italy. That ended up, it was in Italy's hands for like the next 11, 12 years. It was actually rumored to be held at the Vatican at some point, and then it was transferred over to the U.S. So,
well, I think we do think it maybe went to Germany, but we don't know when for sure or whatever. And Grush wouldn't speak to when it came here and when it went and all of that. But
some heavy physics there.
It's interesting. It's possible it was a first one-off vehicle that we had at some point before Roswell that, was at right field or something like that. And
so you think that picture of because you see pictures of Kammler stuff, and Breslau, and Pilsen, in Czechoslovakia and Poland. And you see this test rig that's like shaped like, it looks like an acorn or bell or something could be fit in there. You think they were testing maybe the Magenta craft?
I've heard it's also radioactive on that side.
So, I mean, why have that shape at all? Why that shape in particular?
Yeah.
Given... And then it was transferred maybe to right pad or something?
Right. Like at the end of the war when we got in or something like that.
That would be a very interesting...
Or if it wasn't anything.
Scary shit, if it's true. It's because the implications of...
But so do you think that was a UFO crash? You don't know.
I don't know.
But like in 1933, you don't have some sophisticated bell object that you're building. It's like native gravity.
Again, the Pais effect. 1890s physics.
Okay. So you think people like maybe Gerloff figured this out?
What I'm worried about is Walter Bosley, the friend of Dr. Joseph Farrell. Walter Bosley, the whole idea of Ninja. Who the fuck were these guys? The airship, quote unquote, mystery. What's going on here? Because that's around Heaviside time. That speaks to the Pais effect.
But that's a really quick translation from physics to engineering. You think the 1890s airships?
There was some
terrestrial
engineering geniuses back there. Look at Nikola Tesla.
But that would just be wild. That's beyond belief to me.
What if it's all fucking connected?
Do you think it could all be human stuff from the 1890s on?
All of the records could be gone,
I mean, but that's just a crazy cover-up.
And just use the AT craft kind of like... Because they never... Again, I believe their fucking craft touches on manipulation of the superforce.
Yeah.
How the fuck do you do that? How do you manipulate something at the Planck scale?
Keep that secret for 140 years. That seems great.
They also didn't have a lot of the materials technology advances yet.
Sometimes survival makes you crazy.
They would need some sort of parapsychological root access to, control it. They would need, the mind stuff.
That,
in order to,
or possibly a brotherhood of the occult.
Yeah, something like that, like a breakaway civilization, like that.
Breakaway civilization.
Arriving at some insights. actually.
Read up on Dr. Farrell's ideas on the breakaway civilization. Also Dolan. Don't forget Richard Dolan.
But who in the 1890s would have been privy to Heaviside's insights in a way that allowed them to finance the building of, these exotic craft?
No, there's
Given
some
that-
powerful families back then. I'm not going to name names. These are still extremely powerful. Put it this way. It's much better that we know certain names, but we don't know the invisible ones. Because touching even on the invisible one's existence is not a good idea. And it impacts our survival. And again, none of us here are suicidal. We love being alive.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's right.
No, it's, yeah.
Yeah. Let's not go there.
Yeah.
Change the direction of this.
All I was going to say was I was in graduate school doing pulse IC fusion work. When I went to a conference to present, I was introduced to Eric Davis, Hal Puthoff, John Millay, and Sonny White. And
Oh, Sonny White. Yes.
now
You
this
should mention
was
Sonny White.
during OSAP, it turns out.
Yeah.
Basically,
Yeah.
Davis was helping write that book at the time for BVP.
What a book.
What a book.
That book opened my eyes, man.
Yeah.
So you think Sonny White, was a NASA engineer
Eagle,
who was trying to,
Eagle Works, huh? Yeah.
and he was trying to implement the Alcubierre warp drive. And I think now he's funded by DARPA. He's a company called Limitless or something like that. Do you think there's anything to,
Oh, absolutely. Dr. White is right on the money.
you think so?
Oh, yeah.
Because NASA's public.
Have you noticed he hasn't published anything lately?
Always a sign.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And I think they said it failed or something.
That shit happened right before Ningley. Just
Yeah. Interesting.
anyway.
So this Hampton, Langley incursion last year that we now are understanding, happened. You know what I'm talking about? You have Hampton Air Force Base. You
I've heard of it.
17-day incursion where it seems like drones are swarming around the area in our airspace. We have no defense against this. It seems like there's maybe a mothership. Chris Mellon said there's a mothership. What do you think about that? What do you make of it?
Let me ask one crucial question here. I don't know why people don't ask these questions. Fine, safety of life. Very important, yes. Was anybody killed? Yes or no?
I believe so.
I don't know that they would. I mean, if it were, it would be highly concealed.
Do you think maybe?
I don't think anybody was killed.
And so what?
There should be an answer to your question. I'm not going to go further.
Is it extraterrestrial?
I'm not going to go further.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Again,
Show.
there's ET tech and there's man-made tech. Many roads lead to Rome, but there's only one via Appia.
If it's adversarial, it's awful confrontational. And if it's some advanced tech, they've got it way away from their shores,
Yeah.
over our territory, where it could be downed and captured by us, and assess attribution and do any reverse engineering. It's the only reason I'm skeptical of an adversarial origin. But at the same time, there were witness reports that they could hear them, that they were like lawnmowers. They were audible. And what do you do with that?
I think we. Yeah.
Remember the reverse engineering part. Lazar speaks to this. Why he was there to begin with. He was there as a replacement for someone that had gotten killed trying to what? Use a blowtorch to go through this. Again, why did they never crack that? Because their fucking physics talks to engineering the superforce. I don't think we can do that. But I think they're man-made tech that can go around. And again, the most complex of problems has the simplest of solution depending on perspective. What if we found another perspective? John, is the same problem.
So you have spoken publicly with a guy named Ashton Forbes, who is a big proponent of these MH370 videos. And these are these videos where you see these three orbs and they seem to circle around. The MH370 is this Malaysian aircraft. It was on CNN for a couple of months. And it seemed like the civilian aircraft carrying passengers just disappeared in the Southeast Asian territory. And this guy, Ashton Forbes, took to Twitter maybe around a year ago saying he thinks this is man-made tech and that the craft was somehow teleported out of the sky. What do you think?
Don't forget Dave Rossi's fourth orb. That's why Ashton now goes by four orbs.
Interesting.
Four orbs. There must be four orbs. Remember the whole idea that once you open the black hole, what if there is a white hole? But the three orbs would have your three axes, hence your point of origin. But there must be a destination, so there must be a fourth orb.
Negative mass rate.
There must be a fourth orb.
So you think this is?
It's not me. Dave Rossi came up with this idea that there must be a fourth orb. I think he's one right on the money. Dave Rossi is a very interesting engineer that should be looked into as well. So very smart.
Why would you
Brilliant.
teleport a commercial airplane, and where did the airplane end up? Or is it the plot of the?
All I'm saying is when I saw that thing open up, I saw the Pais effect in action. And I told Ashton Ford, that was his first podcast, Hard Truths podcast. I told him, this is the Pais effect. Oh my God.
So you think we have room temperature superconductivity?
Those orbs also speak to AGI, artificial general intelligence, autonomy, AI autonomy. So we're talking about artificial singularity. I don't know.
It's funny. I just interviewed Matthew Pines, and he goes, there's an iron triangle. He goes, AI, quantum, and the Grush stuff. He says, or he was talking to somebody who was like, deep in national security world or whatever. And he was like, the, triangle, the connection between those three things is somehow this incredible technological scene.
Again, cross-domain disciplines coming together. Fusion of these ideas resounding into what? Disruptive technology, exactly what Jack was talking about.
Very interesting.
I hope one day you give your correct name because you're brilliant. People should know you as you are. You're welcome, sir.
Do you think that any of this stuff makes it into our civil infrastructure? I mean, we're sitting in decaying
weaponization by, God forbid, a third party, not even a country. I don't think this is hard to engineer. Really don't. Just leave it there.
So basically the physics stagnation, our physics has to be stagnated because...
Can you imagine some effing person that hates the world engineering this?
Well, my hope is that these nanostructured 3D lattices turn out to be really hard to make. Interestingly, it would be fabs like TSMC doing their 2 nanometer structures. You would need sub-nanometer, maybe even sub-angstrom. An angstrom is 10 to the negative 10th meters, whereas a nanometer is 10 to the negative 9 to manufacture those structures.
But what if there's another way? What if there's a resonance-based way?
A fabrication.
That's not based on material composition. That's not based on fabrication, method of fabrication, protocols, procedures.
Sure.
That's simple.
Interesting.
You don't want a nut to figure that out. That would be bad. That would be a bad day in hell. Or heaven, either way.
What do you want the world to know? What sort of message do you have for people out there?
We need to unify 100%. Need unification. We need people to come together. And if these ideas can bring them together, then so much better for it. But too many things are dividing us now. And what we need is a unifying factor.
Do you want to build a UFO to take us off Earth?
What I want to build is something that can defeat an external enemy, one that's external to Earth. So let's say somewhere close to Proxima Centauri, as we speaking right now, an alien armada is being formed. I would like for us, everyone in this room to come together and with other people, bring together our minds to create in one thing about what Dr. Eric Weinstein is saying is that he thinks that the best of the best, the greatest physicists should be brought together to come up with these ideas. I think even Joe the plumber can contribute. given common sense and enough knowledge. As a matter of fact, look at Ashland Forbes. I'm completely surprised what he's been able to achieve in almost a year, studying this physics on his own. Look into his podcasts. This guy has come up quite a bit. He does not have a physics pedigree. Again, what if Joe the plumber comes up with the greatest physics idea of them all, whatever that may be. But one, again, that helps us come together as an Earth.
This interview is coming on the backs of congressional hearings in Washington, D.C. around the existence of non-human intelligence and unidentified anomalous phenomena, but also programs thereof housed in the government around data collection, quarantining these UFOs, tracking them, that sort of thing. What did you think of the revelation of Immaculate Constellation, this idea of this, top secret program around UFOs?
Do you mean Immaculate Constipation? Because I believe such little information was excreted from those hearings that one could not fathom. For example, coming together, unifying these concepts into something that can save us, Homo sapiens sapiens, from an external enemy. If we continue on with this trickle by trickle disclosure, this farce, again, Immaculate Constipation, we'll get nowhere, absolutely nowhere.
Do you think that there are deeper programs than Immaculate Constellation? Do you think that's sort of...
I guarantee that Arrow will get nowhere in no time at all. So in other words, nothing will come of it again.
You should come with
They'll
me.
generate another great report that will say absolutely nothing.
So there's a Senate hearing this coming week into Arrow's activities, and Arrow has released a report. You should come with me.
That would depend on my higher-ups.
Yeah.
And I would, because of certain personal issues, I'll need a ride. If my higher-ups decide I would be of use, gladly. But again, please let someone drive me there. I need a drive. That's all.
Jack, did you have anything else you wanted to get into? Or let you go good? Dr. Sal Pais, this is an absolute honor. We appreciate you doing this.
The honor was all mine, sir. And please, you are our intellectual equal. Trust me. Certain things you've said during the interview make me say that. I would not say that otherwise. I don't just come up with stuff.
You get decent instincts and, maybe a high level of
whatever it is a glimmer of hope. And we need all the hope we can have.
Right. Appreciate that, man. I appreciate the hat. Wear that.
Yes, sir. Please do. Yes. Looks really good. Woo-hoo! Looks good, brother.
All right.
All right. All right, bro. Ian.